Well, if you haven't heard the news, The Batman has finally come out and it is in theaters, and I just saw it today, so let's talk about it. Hey everybody, my name is David Tate and this is Now Let's Be Honest, and for those of you who've been subscribed to or following this channel long enough, you'll know that this channel used to be called Now Let's Be Honest About Movies, because when I originally created this channel, I mainly did it just so that me and a group of friends could get together and we could talk about our favorite movies and TV shows, and sometimes include how those movies and TV shows relate to our Christian faith and talk about some theological reflections we had on those shows, because typically that's the stuff I like talking about. Since we created the channel, I actually kind of took a little bit of a different approach to what we're doing, and so I kicked off the About Movies so that I could make more just biblical stuff, but occasionally I do still like to talk about movies because I'm still seeing a bunch of movies, and that is the case with today's video as we talk about Matt Reeves' The Batman. I am so excited to talk about this movie because I have been waiting so very long for this movie to come out. I will tell you right off the bat, I think that this movie was my most anticipated movie of 2022 because I have been waiting for this movie and I've been tracking its production since it was first announced so many years back, and it was so nice to see this movie, and I've got a lot of thoughts about it. I was originally wanting to do a much more in-depth breakdown, but what we're going to do today is we're just going to do a spoiler-free review, and then at some point I'm going to tell you spoiler warning, and we are going to dive deep into spoiler talk in regards to The Batman. I have got so much to say, so much I want to say, and I don't think I'll be able to put it all into this video because I don't want it to be 5 hours long, even though it's only a 3-hour movie, which sounds like a long time, but I will tell you that by the end of this movie, I was still wanting it to keep on going. And so, like I said, the first part of this video will be spoiler free, and then whenever I tell you, we will go into some spoilers, so if you want to avoid spoilers, I'll let you know when that's coming. First and foremost, like I said, this movie was my most anticipated movie of the year, not because it's a Batman film and not because it's a superhero film, but just because this movie looked so good from the get-go. Matt Reeves, the director, he knew what he was doing, and even though I will admit that a lot of people were skeptical of Robert Pattinson being cast as Batman, I wasn't necessarily one of those people. Yes, I saw the Twilight movies, I know their reputation, but the thing is, Robert Pattinson's been in a lot of other really good movies since, and I haven't seen a lot of those movies, but I've heard really good things about his acting, and so I had confidence in Matt Reeves and what they were doing with this, because Batman is such a beloved figure that I figured, okay, they probably know what they're doing here. They're not just going to cast somebody and warrant all this backlash for no reason. So I had a good feeling that, yeah, Robert Pattinson was going to be pretty good in this spot, and from the get-go, when that first trailer was released, and even whenever some of the set photos were released, I had a good feeling about this movie, and from the very first trailer and all the trailers that were released, I was like, okay, I think this is exactly the type of movie I've been waiting for. I'm a big superhero fan. As you can see, I've got Superman and Wonder Woman over here. I'm a big superhero fan, but I will admit, I'm not the biggest Batman fan. I know that that's going to get me in trouble with a lot of people because I don't know, like, I've seen all the Batman movies, and I enjoy him as a character, but personally, I've always been more of a Superman fan, because Superman represents light and hope, and those are the things that really get me excited. I like being a very joyful and hopeful person, whereas Batman is very dark and brooding, and he kind of thrives off of fear, and so that's really never been something I gravitate towards. So yes, I like the movies, yes, I recommend the movies to people, I've seen all the Batman movies, and I will take people to go see those movies, but I will admit that they haven't always been my favorite movies that there are, and he's not my favorite superhero, but he does have a lot of really good storylines, and he's got a lot of really good villains, but I will admit that this movie was a Batman movie, and I was here for it because this is the Batman that I really like. This movie placed a heavy emphasis on the detective side of Batman, which is something that we haven't really seen in a lot of Batman movies so far. A lot of Batman movies, they've kind of just reduced him. They've had the billionaire playboy Bruce Wayne. Sorry, can't talk. They've got the billionaire playboy Bruce Wayne. And then they've got like this brooding, dark Batman who, you know, he's a big crime fighter, he's a really skilled martial artist and stuff like that. And they have hints at the fact that he is a detective and that he's really smart. But there really hasn't been a movie so far that has really tackled the fact that he is the world's greatest detective. I mean, Batman debuted in Detective Comics. That's where DC Comics comes from, right? It's really Detective Comics comics. That's what DC stands for. Batman debuted in Detective Comics. He is the world's greatest detective, and that is, to me, the most compelling part of the Batman mythos. And unfortunately, that's been absent for most of the movies, and that's probably one reason why I never gravitated towards those movies. But this movie, The Batman, man, do they nail it in the head. This is a great movie that totally tackles the detective side of Batman, and it's really a detective noir style film where I really liked it. There's this overall, this isn't a spoiler, because I think that, I mean, it doesn't spoil any plot points, so I think you should be fine with this. But there's this overarching narrated, like Batman himself is narrating the movie for a good portion of this movie, where he's just talking about his inner thoughts and his inner monologue going on that's explaining what he's thinking or how he views Gotham City and stuff like that. And it felt like one of those old detective noir movies where you can just imagine like a guy smoking a cigarette or a cigar or something, and he's just like, you know, the screen's black and white, and he's just recapping the events of the day, trying to solve a mystery. That's how this movie felt, and I love that because I love a good detective story, I love a good mystery, and whenever you take that and you combine it with superheroes, that's exactly my cup of tea. And so this was my definitive Batman movie, and I will say that this is my favorite Batman movie. Yes, I agree, I've seen The Dark Knight like 1 billion times, and I'll say that is a great movie, if not one of the best movies of all time, but when it comes to Batman, I don't know if that's really a Batman movie. This is a Batman movie, and this is the aspect of Batman I really, really like. I've always liked the detective side of Batman, and so this was my cup of tea. The cinematography of this movie is also absolutely brilliant, and this is probably the thing that sold me the most from the trailers, because in the trailers you could tell right off the bat that this was a beautiful looking movie. I mean, if you go to the movie trailers and you just look and watch the trailer for the Batman, you'll see that you can just screenshot almost any single moment. And it'll be something that you could just like copy, paste, throw it up on a canvas and hang it on your wall, because it is a beautiful movie. It is gorgeously shot, and that is something I always appreciate in movies. I mean, that's one reason why I probably defend the Snyder movies when it comes to the DC movies like Man of Steel, Batman vs. Superman, the Snyder Cut. I've always liked those movies a lot more than a lot of people, and that's because I just like really good cinematography. And so you have that in the Batman, whereas the movies like all the Avengers movies and all the Marvel stuff, those are decent movies, and they're arguably better than a lot of the DC movies, but to me they're kind of stale when it comes to cinematography, whereas the shadows and the coloring and the contrast of all these different scenes in movies like this or in the Snyder movies, they're just so beautiful that they're like artwork on screen. And to me, that's exactly what film should be. I like things being artistic, and I think that Matt Reeves really killed it when it comes to the artistry behind this film. I think he did an absolutely brilliant job, to where a lot of this movie, probably like 90 or 95% of this movie, takes place at nighttime, or at least in dark scenes, which is expected because this is Gotham City. But despite that, you can still see everything. Sometimes you have movies where it's so dark that you literally cannot see anything that's going on. But Matt Reeves had a way of lighting everything, whether they're in a nightclub, whether they're out on the street, whether there's a car chase going on in the middle of the rain. No matter what you're seeing, even though it's a dark setting, he still lights it in such a way to where you know exactly what's going on. And even in the fight scenes, that's another thing where a lot of the times directors will take this easy way out when it comes to fight scenes, and the cinematography will just be shaky, or there'll be a lot of quick cuts to where you have no idea what's going on. But the fight choreography in this was absolutely fantastic as well. And so everything from a cinematic or cinematographical? I don't know what the word would be for a cinematography. The cinematic perspective of this, all those aspects were really, really great. And you can tell that Matt Reeves, the director, that he poured his heart and soul into this movie. Also, the score of this movie, I already went and bought it. I think it's fantastic. It is going to get stuck in your head. I actually bought the score before seeing this movie because I'd heard snippets of it and I thought it sounded so good. I was like, okay, I gotta get this. It is worth listening to, and I will hear the Batman theme in this like just ring in my head. It's literally been stuck in my head since I walked out of the theater. It's like, like that was actually a terrible example of that. I really apologize that you had to listen to that, because that was a terrible, like, that did no justice to the actual score. Go listen to it. It's fantastic. But it really captured the essence of what they were going for with this Batman figure, because it's different than, you know, the 1989 Batman theme. It's vastly different, but that's because this is a different Batman. This score, the way that it kind of like lingers out and it's got this like heavy weight to it, it kind of really does make Batman this like creature of the night and hiding in the shadows, lurking in the shadows, to where he is a feared individual. And you get that from just the music playing in the background, and the way that the music is interwoven into the movie is just brilliant. It's fantastic. And I know that I'm being kind of vague with all this, but that's because I'm trying to avoid as many spoilers as possible, because if you haven't seen this movie, I don't want to spoil anything for you. I want you to go see this movie so that we can actually talk about the stuff that's really, really important. So I'm just trying to be very vague with this first part so that we can actually get to the meat of everything. But everything from the detective aspect of this, to the cinematography, to the score of the movie, all of it was great. Like I said, the narration, I loved that aspect of it. It almost was like a Batman comic book, where a lot of the times Batman is narrating his own story, because Batman's a kind of quiet and brooding figure who a lot of the times he doesn't say a lot. And so if you want to know what's going on in his head, he's got to narrate it. Whereas, Superman, he talks a lot, and so he'll just say stuff. But Batman, he's got to narrate things. And so I appreciated how they included that, and it added to the noir aspect of this movie, to where the movie kind of opens and closes with Batman's narration. And it doesn't close with Batman's narration, but there is narration throughout it. And I just really liked that, because it just added this air of grittiness to it, to where you did get the feel that Batman is far more intellectual and thoughtful than we typically see. Usually in the movies, we catch the side of Batman that's very, he's a brute and he's quick to jump into the action, and you get hints to the fact that yes, he is very smart. You have him sitting down in the Batcave looking at computers a lot and stuff, but this really just nails in the head. Like, it's almost philosophical. There's a lot of themes where I've actually thought about this. I still need to see the movie a few more times, I will admit that. Just going into this review, I want to admit I need to see this film a few more times before I have a solid stance on it, because there's some things that I think I was so excited for the film that I was just taking it all in. And I want to go back and rewatch it in such a way to where I can actually just appreciate every single moment. But I do think that after I've seen it a few more times, I might want to come back and make another video where I do like a theological or even philosophical analysis of this movie, because a lot of the narration that Batman includes here, it's kind of philosophical in nature, to where he's kind of wrestling through his role in relationship to Gotham City and whether or not he's accomplishing the task that he set about going for, and also just like kind of wrestling through it. Once again, I'm trying to be vague because I don't want to spoil anything for those of y'all who haven't seen this, but just wrestling through the nature of what he's going for, and also, just corruption, right? He's wrestling through the nature of corruption, the nature of vengeance, the nature of who he is, the nature of who Gotham City is, the nature of who these bad guys are and what they're doing. He's wrestling through all that, and I really appreciated the narration because of the extra layer of depth it gave this movie, to where it made it much more artistic. If it didn't have that narration, some people might not like the narration. But if it didn't have it, I think that the movie would be worse off, and I think that's always a good sign. Sometimes directors or screenwriters, they will add narration just to provide exposition to a movie, and I think that's very lazy. I think there's better ways to go about giving exposition into a movie than just having the person narrate or voice over stuff, because typically a lot of times what they'll do is that they will just use it at the very beginning of a movie, to where it's like, hey, by the way, this is what's going on, and it's just introducing you to the world, and then the narration just goes away and it never comes back. Whereas the narration in and of itself in this movie is almost like a character, to where it wouldn't feel whole without that narration. And I don't know whether or not they're going to continue that, if there's going to be future movies and stuff like that. I don't know if they're going to continue with the narration, but I really hope they do, because I thought that was a really cool aspect of this movie that set it apart from all the other Batman ones that we've had before. Also, another thing, that this is not a spoiler, Robert Pattinson is Batman like 95% of this movie. Like, you don't get a lot of Bruce Wayne, you get mostly Batman. And that's another thing that sets this movie apart from all the other Batman movies, because this is a primarily Batman-driven movie. One thing that I mentioned earlier on in this review is that typically Batman has not been my favorite character, but I have really appreciated his villains. People like the Riddler, Joker, Mr. Freeze, Bane, Scarecrow. Batman has this amazing rogues gallery that's just really interesting, and he's got a lot of interesting characters, and seeing their dynamic back and forth with one another, I've always really appreciated that. And really, DC Comics in general has a really good roster of villains, and that's something that I think is really cool. If you go to the Marvel movies, really the heroes are kind of the standouts and the villains are kind of lackluster, but when you go to DC, I think they've got a good balance of both, and the villains actually usually kind of, they take the trophy for being the more important and the cooler. But in this movie, it kind of avoids doing what other Batman movies have done, and rather than making the main focus of the film the bad guy, the main focus is Batman, and I really appreciate that because it allowed you to dive deep into who Batman is, especially this early on, because this movie, this isn't a spoiler, it's set in like year 2 of what Batman's been doing. He's been working in Gotham for 2 years. This is stuff that's kind of, it's in the summary of the whole movie ahead of time, so this isn't spoiling anything, but he's in year 2 of his, what he calls the Gotham Project, and he's not sure whether or not he's accomplishing the tasks that he set about going for. And so a lot of this movie is just Batman figuring out how he can perfect what he's doing to become the Batman that we know and love later on, who's more professional, who knows exactly what he's doing, who's always calculating, doing stuff, that he's not primarily driven by vengeance and heartache and anger. So we have a very emotionally driven Batman in this film. And so you have this character arc for him, which is really nice. I think that the Dark Knight movies did a good job at giving Bruce Wayne a good character arc in each film. But a lot of the other Batman films, they really haven't. I mean, if you go to the 1989 Batman movie with Michael Keaton, or if you go to Batman Returns, or if you go to Batman Forever, or Batman and Robin, a lot of the times those films, Batman's just like kind of a one-dimensional character where he doesn't really change a whole lot over the film. Really, it's just him being the same, and he's having to deal with the world changing around him, which can be very compelling. I mean, if you go to the Captain America movies, that's kind of how all those movies are. Captain America stays the same, and the world's changing around him, and that's a very compelling story. And so some of those Batman movies are really good. But I really preferred this Batman movie where you actually have Bruce Wayne having a good arc, and it's a needed arc to help him become the Batman that we know he will one day become. And so I thought that was really cool. What else can I say spoiler-free before we jump into spoilers? The Riddler, he's the main villain of this, right? Fantastic, absolutely. Paul Dano, he does such an amazing job as the Riddler. Once again, I would say more, but I don't want to spoil things, and so I'll say that really, Robert Pattinson does a great job as Batman, Paul Dano does a great job as the Riddler, and every single actor or actress does a fantastic job with the role that is assigned to them. They are probably, let me think, yeah, I would say they are definitively my favorite versions of these characters. I had to think because I don't want to lie to you. This channel is called Now Let's Be Honest, after all. I wanted to make sure I was telling the truth. Yeah, I would say that these are the definitive versions of these characters on screen in my mind. It's always hard. It's hard to pass up Gary Oldman as Jim Gordon from the Dark Knight movies, because I thought he kind of just personified Jim Gordon, but I really did like Jeffrey Wright as Jim Gordon in this movie, and so yeah, that was really fantastic. And I think that's probably it for the spoiler-free stuff, because I don't want to talk too long on here, and I'd like to actually get to spoilers, because that's the stuff that I'm really excited to talk about, because there's so much to talk about. And so, yeah, that's it for the spoiler-free review. If you have watched this far and you don't want any spoilers, stop here, right? Stop the video, pause the video, get out of here, go watch the movie, and then come back and watch it afterwards. So, spoiler warning going forward. Spoiler warning, spoiler warning, spoiler warning. Turn away now. This is your last chance. 3, 2, 1. Here we go. Okay. So let's just start talking about the plot here, right? So the main plot of this film is, like, right off the bat, you have this guy. First off, the movie is kind of a horror film. I probably should have mentioned that in the spoiler-free part. There's some horror elements to this. This is a hard PG-13 movie, and yeah, it's pretty brutal in some places, but very interesting. And that's why I said I'm excited to do like a theological reflection on this, because there are some elements that people might be kind of disturbed by, especially if you're like a Christian going to see this movie. There might be some aspects that you're uncomfortable with, but I think that there is an element that you could grab onto some of the themes that are being addressed in this movie, and there's a good theological reflection on it. So let me see the movie a few more times and I will address that. But right off the bat in this film, it opens up with a murder, right? It opens up with the Riddler, and he is murdering this guy who is running for mayor. And it's a very horrific scene. And right off the bat, you've got this guy who's dead, and then you have not Commissioner Gordon yet, but he is Detective or Lieutenant Gordon, played by Jeffrey Wright. He's walking in, and right behind him is the Batman, right? And they come in there. Actually, I'm trying to think. Okay. Sorry, I'm getting lost here. I've only seen the movie once. That wasn't the introduction of the Batman, was it? No. So you have the murder, but then you have to cut to another aspect because Batman's introduced in a different way. I believe. Man, I need to see the movie again. And yeah, so if I'm getting the chronology mixed up here, forgive me. But the way Batman's introduced is actually, I believe, whenever he's talking about the bat signal and its role there, and so I'll talk about that in a second. Really cool scene, but just to stay consistent with the main storyline of the Riddler, the guy gets killed, the mayoral candidate gets killed, and Lieutenant Gordon comes in, and Batman's with him. So right off the bat, you have a different dynamic between Batman and pretty much anybody else. This is stuff that we haven't seen since probably the 1960s Adam West Batman, where Batman is on this close cahoots with the police department, right? Where he's just like openly hanging out with them. And you can tell that the people, like the cops and stuff and the forensic scientists, they're very disturbed by this guy. They are uncomfortable having him around. But because Gordon has said that Batman's going to help them out, they kind of have to roll with it. And so you get the idea that even though Gordon isn't yet the commissioner, he still does pull a certain amount of weight amongst the police force, and so what he says is going to kind of go, and they've kind of come to appreciate who Batman is. And so you have a very different dynamic between Batman and the cops than you really have with Batman and anybody in any of previous incarnations, right? I mean, in the Dark Knight trilogy, Batman's open vigilante where the cops are literally chasing him through the streets, whereas in this one, Batman's on a crime scene with them, and he's figuring stuff out, and right off the bat, you get to see that Batman is a different sort of Batman. He is noticing stuff that even the forensic experts aren't yet noticing, so you see that this guy is intellectual, he's perceptive, and he gets to see, and he's smart, right? He knows his science, he knows about how wounds heal, and whether or not a person's thumb was cut off before or after he died. Very interesting stuff. And so you get to see that this Batman is a different type of Batman than we have seen in prior movies. And so right off the bat, I like that. This is a scene that we've seen from the trailers. I'm assuming it's one of the earlier ones that was shot because it was before they had to take a break because of the pandemic and stuff. But it's a really good scene that it serves as a good introduction to this new style of Batman. And it launches off this whole series of events that's going to take forth for the rest of the movie, where you have the Riddler, right? And he calls himself the Riddler in a video that he releases. He calls himself the Riddler, and he keeps killing certain people or setting up different situations where the people end up dying who he believes are corrupt. And he keeps leaving these riddles, and he specifically directs these riddles to the Batman. Throughout most of the movie, people keep calling Batman Vengeance, but the Riddler specifically always calls him Batman, which I found very interesting. Because I'm trying to think right now. I can't think of anybody else who directly calls him Batman. I'm sure somebody does. But most people seem to call him Vengeance, which is weird because I didn't originally think that he was actually going by the name Vengeance. It seems like he was just calling himself Vengeance, but for some reason, everybody seemed to call him that, which is interesting. And that plays a part later on in the movie. But yeah, so the Riddler's always writing letters to the Batman. And this gives a certain level of intrigue to this because everybody's wondering, why is he addressing these to the Batman? What does the Batman have to do with this whole series of murders? And this entire movie takes place over the course of 1 week. It starts on October 31st and it goes till November 6th, right? So it starts on Halloween night and goes for the next week as Batman is trying to figure out what to do with this Riddler. What is his endgame? What is his plan? And so over the course of this, you have a bunch of different riddles coming in here, and I thought the riddles were actually really good. I went and saw this movie with Brienne, if y'all know who that is, if you've been following this channel long enough. This is Brienne right there. Went and saw this movie with her, and we were kind of like joking with each other during the movie, trying to figure out if we could figure out the riddles before Batman did. But even then, there are times where Batman figures out a riddle in like 20 seconds, and he's able to put together some riddles that are so far-fetched that it's actually really impressive. But the riddles are really clever. In a way, it actually kind of reminded me a little bit of the Adam West Batman movies with some of the riddles because they were so on the nose, but they weren't as cheesy as the Adam West ones. If you haven't seen any clips of that, please go on YouTube right now. You're already on YouTube, right? But wait till after this video. After this video, go look up the Adam West Batman Riddler scenes and just look at the riddles that he had back in the 1960s. They're really funny, really campy, and just really outlandish. And it seems like maybe Matt Reeves was trying to kind of, allude to that a little bit, because some of the riddles were kind of campy a little bit, but they were still so grounded to where you could understand that like it really it plays off differently, right? In the 1960s Batman one, you just get that the Riddler is kind of just a goofball, whereas in this one, you see that the Riddler's just got a really twisted sense of humor, right? He's really dark and he's really demented and he's really messed up and he really needs help and he probably really needs Jesus, and so it's a totally different play, right? So yes, some of the riddles are kind of corny, kind of cheesy, kind of weird, and it seems kind of like an allusion to the 1960s stuff, but really, it seems like this guy's just really demented and he's got some major psychological issues. And it's interesting that Batman can pick up on those because it might hint at the fact that Batman's not totally sane either, which is something that I've kind of always thought because there are a lot easier ways that Batman could go about probably helping the city than dressing up as a giant bat and doing this. There's probably healthier ways to cope with your parents' death. That's probably another reason why I've never really cared for Batman. I've always been more of a Superman person because Batman, it's kind of just a strange situation. I mean, I get it. It's a superhero thing, like suspension of disbelief, yeah. But Superman, I've always just liked him a lot more because, you know, he's like this super powerful guy and he could use it for evil, but he chooses to use it for good, and that's a really compelling story. Batman, it's alright. But this movie, once again, this is the type of Batman I really like. And so you have all these riddles going forth throughout the whole movie, and that is the main conflict that drives the plot forward. And once again, this is a 3-hour movie, which I think was really good. I didn't feel like it was that long, and even whenever the movie came to an end, I was kind of disappointed because, to me, it felt like it had only been 2 hours, and I was like, oh, wait, it's over? Like, Brienne and I looked at each other, we're like, oh, man, I was kind of disappointed because I thought it was going to keep going. And so that kind of made me sad. So the 3 hours went by like that to me. And so that's why I'm excited to see it again. Because I'm like, okay, cool. It didn't feel like 3 hours. But that's the main plot, right? It's Batman versus the Riddler, and he's trying to track down these riddles. And so that's the one thing that really drives everything forward. But then about midway through this, Batman learns that it seems like the Riddler's next target is going to be none other than Bruce Wayne. And so you have this new foil introduced into this where you have something where this was raised in the trailer for the movie, right? So really this isn't a spoiler either, but there's this mystery over the sins of Bruce's father, right? That's how the Riddler keeps putting it, the sins of the father. And obviously Batman puts it together, the sins of the father will be visited upon the son, and that's why the Riddler is after Bruce Wayne, because Thomas Wayne did something sketchy that you've got to figure out what exactly did he do. And so a lot of the plot for the second half of this movie is Batman trying to figure out, what did my dad do? What did he do that was so bad that the Riddler's trying to kill Bruce Wayne? That's really curious. And this is where I thought it was really cool how whenever Batman starts figuring this different stuff out, you actually have some really cool little Easter eggs here that I thought was really interesting. And I really didn't know where else to put this in the review, so I just wanted to address it now. You have reference to, it turns out that Thomas Wayne, and I might butcher this a little bit because once again, I've seen the movie once, and I think once I see it again, I'll be able to understand a little bit better. But Thomas Wayne basically was trying to cover up some stuff in regards to his wife, Martha. Because Martha Wayne was formerly, her maiden name was Martha Arkham, which is interesting because of Arkham Asylum, right? So she came from the Arkham family, and apparently there was this whole debacle where I think her father killed her mother? I believe it was. I could be mistaken there. Once again, I'll see it again. I think her father killed her mother, and then Martha herself had some really really bad mental issues. And so whenever Thomas Wayne was running for mayor, he was really kind of concerned for Martha, and so he tried to get that covered up. But as a result, he had somebody killed, and so the Riddler blames Thomas Wayne for that. And because of this, because of all the stuff that happened, eventually, this orphanage got shut down, and that's where the Riddler grew up at, and so he held a lot of animosity towards Thomas Wayne, and therefore he was taking vengeance on Thomas Wayne by visiting the sins of the father upon the son, upon Bruce. And so throughout this whole revelation, whenever Bruce is learning all this stuff, there's, first off, the Easter egg about Martha coming from the Arkham family, which I believe is something that's found in the comics, in some runs where she does come from the Arkham family that, eventually results in Arkham Asylum and everything. But then there's also a reference, which I don't know if everybody caught, but it mentions a person named Elliot, and I wish that I remember the specifics about this. And so I'm going to be watching for it again next time. But I remember there was a person named Elliot who was mentioned, and then on the screen, the word hush popped up on there. And I thought that was cool because if you've read the Batman comics, you'll know that there was this Batman villain called Hush, and I believe it turned out that his name was not Jim Elliot. Jim Elliot was a missionary. I forget what the guy's name was. It was something Elliot. And it turns out that he was like a childhood friend of Bruce Wayne or something, and I think they looked a lot alike or something. The guy like wore like bandages around his face. And what was cool to me is that I thought that the Riddler's design in this movie was very similar to the Hush design from the comics. And so I don't know if that's why they included that in there, but it was a little Easter egg to the Batman villain Hush. And so I thought that was kind of cool. I didn't hear anybody else in the theater catch on to that, but I thought it was neat that they put that little Easter egg in there. We have Elliot and then like the words Hush go on the screen. Whenever I see it again, I'll have to pay more attention to exactly what was going on there. But it was during the whole revelation whenever Bruce is watching the information about his parents and figuring that all out. And so that was a really cool other aspect of this. And long story short, it turns out that Thomas Wayne was not as guilty as the Riddler seemed to suggest. But at the same time, it does seem like Thomas Wayne was just a little bit foolish because apparently he came to, what's his name? Falcone. He came to Falcone, which is the mob boss, and he had asked him to take care of the issue. And as a result, the person got killed. And it seems like Thomas Wayne was like, whoa, I didn't mean to kill them. But it's like, okay, you went to a mob boss asking them to take care of the issue. What did you think was going to happen? And so it seems like Thomas Wayne was more foolish than anything. And then he wasn't actually a bad guy. And so it seems like the Riddler was a little bit incorrect there. And so the Waynes weren't as horrible as it was presented. And so that's kind of resolved. And to me, that was a little bit anticlimactic because in the trailers for the movie, they kind of made it set up like this was going to be a huge revelation. And it seems like it was. And then it immediately is kind of undercut by the fact that, oh no, it turns out they were still somewhat decent people. But we don't really know there either. The way that Alfred kind of described that was, I don't know. It seemed like he might have just been still kind of defending Thomas Wayne just a little bit to Bruce. I don't know. So That was kind of an interesting plot point. Like I said, I think it was a little bit anticlimactic, but I do think it is somewhat important that the Waynes were good people, just because that's pretty crucial to Batman's character. You know, he's defending their legacy and he's trying to be part of the solution, and so it kind of changes things if his parents were also bad people, because the whole thing is like, you know, you have innocent people being killed by muggers, and that's like his whole drive to go bring forth justice. Which really, I guess it means it's a selfish pursuit because he's almost just like trying to save his parents by proxy by doing this. But I do think it is important for Batman's motivation that his parents were somewhat decent people. And so I'm glad that they kind of did change that, but I will admit it was anticlimactic to the storyline that they did set up. And so those are the main things that we have driving the plot, right? We've got the riddles, and then we've got the whole thing with the Waynes, figuring out what that is. And then one other thing I wanted to talk about is the bat signal. This is something that we see right off the bat early on in the movie. And I think this is actually where we're getting our first introduction to Batman before he even shows up on the crime scene. And it's where we have the narration. And once again, the narration is like my favorite part of this movie. I loved it. I hope more Batman movies do this. I hope that if they make more movies that they will continue this narration thing because I loved it. And it shows like the bat signal flying, like shining in the sky. And the bat signal's been in other Batman movies, but this one looked really good. And I liked how Batman viewed it, right? Because Batman, he's talking about this, and he says, whenever that signal's shining in the sky, it's more than just a signal. It's a warning. And the way that he's describing this is he says that whenever villains or criminals, whenever they see that signal in the sky, it's not just for Batman to see it, the criminals see it as well. And while they're committing their acts, all of a sudden, they fear that Batman's lurking in the shadows. But then he says, they think I'm in the shadows, but I am the shadows. I don't remember the exact quote there, but it's something along those lines. He's like, I'm not in the shadows. I am the shadows. And the idea is that you have a few different moments where, like, you've got some guys who are, like, graffitiing stuff on, some columns. And then one of them drops their spray paint and it rolls into the shadows. And you just see this terror in his face because he's thinking, is Batman there? And part of you is almost expecting the spray paint can to like roll back or something to where Batman like shows up, but he's not there. And so Batman's whole thing is that the moment that light comes up, the criminals know that Batman is coming for somebody. And so they're freaked out, and every time they see a shadow, they think Batman could be there. And that's whenever it finally cuts to this group of thugs who are like doing this initiation thing where they're just like beating up people. And you've got this one kid, he was an actor, he's in the show Titans, where he actually plays a future Robin character, which is interesting. But he's playing a thug in this movie. And he's wanting to be initiated into this group, this gang member group. And all of a sudden Batman shows up, and this is where you have the scene from the from the movie trailer where, you know, it's like, I'm vengeance. And it's a brutal introduction to Batman. Like, I mean, it's raining, and then you hear his, like, heavy steps, like, walking forward. And I thought that was a great introduction to who Batman is, and it sets up his story arc for the rest of the film when it comes from him going from a person of vengeance to recognizing that the vengeance is the very thing that's holding him back from being the productive Batman he wants to be. Because, like I said, the whole question that Batman's wrestling through over the course of this movie is this Gotham Project succeeding, right? He's keeping this journal, these journals, and he's like, Gotham Project, year number 2, and he's like writing down all this stuff, trying to wrestle through, is my project succeeding, or am I actually contributing to the problem? And as he learns by the end of the movie, his vengeance is the very thing that's contributing to the problem. He is driving himself for, like, by vengeance, right? His parents were killed, and so he is wanting to go rid the streets of evil so that other people don't have to go through that. And so it's a just form of vengeance, but it's vengeance nonetheless, and he's introducing himself as vengeance. Later on, he's going to interact with Catwoman, and she's going to want to take vengeance, and she's going to use his line against him, say that, hey, vengeance, this is what we're supposed to do. And he's going to have to realize, no, there's got to be a different way. You can't take total vengeance. Later on, one of the Riddler's goons, right, one of his little compadres who decides to come help him out at the end, he's also going to introduce himself as vengeance because the Riddler is also taking vengeance. This is where I'm thinking that there is a good room for philosophical and theological analysis because it's the idea that vengeance does not belong to humans. If I'm going to be biblical about this, vengeance belongs to the Lord, right? Humans aren't the ones who are responsible for taking vengeance, and that's what Batman realizes over the course of this film. Batman's wrestling through this fact. He's like, okay, I'm driving myself by vengeance, but in preaching that, in announcing that I'm vengeance, I'm inspiring other people to be vengeful. Catwoman almost takes a person's life. Batman has to stop her from taking her own father's life, right? The Riddler, all of his goons, they're taking vengeance on the aristocrats, on the corrupt government officials. They're doing the same thing that Batman's doing, but they're doing it against people who shouldn't, who deserve justice, but who shouldn't be killed, right? They're taking vengeance, but going beyond that, and that's the issue with vengeance. People typically aren't just with vengeance. They always go an extra step. They always go too far. Batman's good at keeping himself in check, so when he's going about his vengeful tactics, he always holds back and he doesn't deal the final blow. Other people don't have that same self-control, and so Batman realizes that he's actually part of the problem, and so by the end of the movie, he goes from being vengeance to recognizing he needs to be more a beacon of hope. And so that's where you get this transition for Batman, and you get this beautiful character arc over the course of the film. And so you have this introduction to him where it's dark and brooding, and he's beating somebody up and saying, I'm vengeance, but by the end of the film, he's lighting signal flares, and he's helping people out, and he's carrying a woman to a helicopter out in the broad daylight, and you have this very different Batman by the end of the film where he's actually openly helping people, and he's not just driving himself by vengeance. He's making it clear that he's here to help people like a genuine superhero, and I think that's a different aspect of Batman than we've ever seen in film. Typically, Batman is not out there in the public like this, but this Batman is taking those steps, and so I really, really appreciated that. Another thing that kind of confused me, and if you've seen the movie, maybe you can clarify this for me, and I'm sure that I'll have this clarified once I go see the movie again. But Brienne and I were very confused as we were watching this. Did the Riddler know that Bruce Wayne was Batman? Because there were times, like basically it all comes down to whenever Batman is in the Riddler's, lair, basically, you know, when he's in his, apartment and they're looking at everything, Batman, sees all these newspaper clippings where it looks like he's finally putting 2 and 2 together, and it seems like the Riddler knows who he is. And then Batman goes and he visits the Riddler back down at Arkham, right? And while they're talking, the Riddler says something that seems to imply that he knows that Batman is Bruce Wayne, but then he says something later on that makes it seem like maybe he was just talking about Bruce Wayne to Batman, but it was really weird. I wasn't totally sure what was going on there. Especially because it was all being recorded, and they took the time to show that there was a recording of them talking to each other, and so that was an aspect of the movie that really confused me, and maybe I was just so lost in the spectacle of the movie and just getting excited over what was coming next that I wasn't paying enough attention to what was actually being said. But that was something that did actually confuse me, and I don't really know. I just wanted to mention that because maybe just for my own sake, whenever I come rewatch this video years from now, I'll be like, oh man, I was dumb. I can't believe I didn't understand that. But if you could clarify that for me, if you've seen this, that was something that did kind of confuse me, and hopefully I'll understand it more when I rewatch this movie. But I was kind of unclear as to whether or not the Riddler knew that Bruce Wayne was Batman. Because Brianne and I left the movie assuming that was the case, but the more I thought about it, I was just kind of confused there, and I don't really know what to do with that. And so that was the thing that was, I think it might have been communicated a little bit better, but also certain things, it seems like what happened is that the Riddler was expecting Batman to join his side, and whenever Batman didn't join his side, the Riddler started freaking out. And that's, I think, the thing that confuses me, because I don't know, something about that interaction between Batman and the Riddler in the Arkham, I was kind of confused as to what was being communicated there, and it could be that the Riddler is just so smart that it goes beyond my intellect. I don't know. But something about that was kind of confusing to me, and so I just wanted to mention that. So if one of y'all could clarify that for me, that would be absolutely fantastic. Okay, now let's move on from the plot, and let's move on to the actual characters. Obviously, I'm not going to address every single thing that happened in this movie, because there's just so much to talk about. And so if I didn't talk about something in the plot that you wanted to mention it in the comments. I'll respond to you and we can talk about it there. For right now, I'm just trying to talk about the things that really stood out to me. Let's talk about the characters. Let's just start walking through them. Penguin, right? Penguin is in this film, played by Colin Farrell, who is absolutely unrecognizable in this. It's fantastic. He did a fantastic job as Penguin, first off. I really like the guy who played Penguin in the TV show Gotham, which I didn't watch Gotham for the first few seasons because I really never got into it, but then I heard that the later seasons were good, and so I watched those, and I think maybe the middle seasons of Gotham were actually fairly decent. But one thing that was consistently good from the TV show Gotham was I really liked the portrayal of Oswald Cobblepot, or the Penguin. But I think that Colin Farrell's portrayal of the Penguin just blew things out of the water. First off, he's a very realistic take of the Penguin. He does have that certain element of the Penguin. He's very laughable, to where there's this one scene where the Penguin says to Batman, like, do you know my reputation? And then Batman's like, do you? Because it's like Penguin thinks that people take him more seriously than people actually do. And so he's like looking to Batman like, do you know my reputation? Like, do you know how important I am? And then Batman's like, do you know your reputation? Because people really kind of make fun of you. And so I'm excited for that. I think that they announced that there is going to be a spin-off show on HBO Max about the Penguin. And I think that they did plenty to set that up. I think that I don't know, sometimes it seems like spin-off shows and stuff are just cash grabs, which, I mean, in general they are. But having watched this movie, I can say that I genuinely do want to know what goes on with the Penguin next, and so I will watch that whenever it comes out, because I thought first off, the makeup was just fantastic. I mean, it was just crazy. The car chase scene between Batman and the Penguin, fantastic. That Batmobile, mwah, it's just like a muscle car that's like, I want one. Like, I want a Batmobile like that. That was so cool. Like, it's crazy that it's such a simple design, but it's so fantastic, and its first reveal came out of nowhere, and that car chase scene was just, it was great. I loved it. It was just a beautiful, beautiful scene. And so I thought Colin Farrell's the Penguin, absolutely fantastic. He's not in the movie a whole lot, but when he's in it, he shines. And he's pretty funny, too. There's a lot of moments where, one particular moment is whenever he's all tied up, whenever Gordon and Batman just leave him there all tied up, and he's kind of wobbling like a penguin, and I thought that was kind of funny, because he's the Penguin, you know? And I thought that was cool. Next, Falcone, played by John Turturro. I really don't know much about the crime bosses from the Batman stuff. They've never been the most interesting to me when it comes to Batman stories. But you primarily have, you have Carmine Falcone and Is it Carmine Falcone and Salvatore Maroni, I think? I don't know. I think those are the two crime bosses. I don't know if those are the names, if those are proper. But Maroni's mentioned a lot in this film, but Falcone is the one who's right at the forefront, because he's actually a pretty major character in this, and I thought he was pretty decent. I mean, he plays a good crime boss to where he's very slick and very charismatic. He's Selina Kyle's father. I think my favorite scene with him was the one where he's actually interacting with Bruce Wayne at the mayor's funeral, right? Whenever they're meeting up there, and there's this brief interaction where they bump into each other. Penguin's standing there and everything. And Falcone mentions the time whenever Thomas Wayne healed him from a bullet wound. And, you have this really tense interaction between Falcone and Bruce in that moment. And I thought that was probably my favorite scene with Falcone. But I thought the job was really well done. I mean, he played the part. I just, like I said, the crime bosses aren't necessarily the ones that I've been drawn to. I do like the Penguin just because he's different. But Falcone and stuff like it, I've just never been really drawn to the whole mob stuff, the aspect of things. I've always, if I'm gonna read a superhero comic or watch a superhero movie, I'm more there for the superhero elements of it. And so I've never really been drawn to those. But I will say that I was never bored when watching his scenes. Really, I was never bored throughout any of this movie. That's why it makes it so easily rewatchable. Sometimes there's movies where you want to rewatch it, but you're like, there's like 30 minutes where I just don't want to watch it. Like this movie, every single scene, I'm excited to rewatch. Like I actually had a consistently good time throughout this whole film. Alfred, played by Andy Serkis. He's not in this movie that much. Very different Alfred. Definitely more of a Batman Earth 1, like hard grizzled Alfred. They really never say a lot on Batman's origins, like in regards to what type of training he went through. I know there was a prequel novel that was released. I actually own it. I just haven't read it. It's like a kid's novel. And they might go into detail there in regards to how Batman trained. I don't know if in this incarnation he went off and trained with Ra's al Ghul or anything like that. But they do make brief mention in the movie that it seems like Alfred played some sort of role in regards to Bruce's training. I don't know if that means he played all of the role. Like, I don't know if Bruce only trained under Alfred or if Alfred was just kind of instrumental in that. But it does seem like Alfred was not only a father figure, not only a butler to Bruce, but he also was part of his trainer. And you do see that Alfred's also very smart. He's very good at, we see him trying to decipher some of the Riddler's crypts and stuff like that. Once again, the Riddler, one thing I really like about him, we're going to talk about him in a second, but I like his very Zodiac /Seven like serial killer vibes. I think that was very interesting. Those are very good movies, very deep, very dark movies, but very interesting. I don't know, I think it's kind of weird. As a Christian, I've always liked serial killer movies because it kind of just embodies the depravity of the human soul. And so it's like whenever I watch those, it's kind of just like a sobering moment being like, man, people can get really dark. And so you're just like watching, you're like, wow, this is sad. And it just like makes you want to weep. And so I did like that aspect of the Riddler. But like, so going back to Alfred, he's not in the movie a whole lot, and for a second I thought they killed him. Whenever it seemed kind of silly to me. I don't know why he opened up something that was so evidently from the Riddler addressed to Bruce Wayne. When that just seemed like a dumb move. I don't know why Alfred did that, but I for a second thought that they just outright killed Alfred, and I was like, wow, bold move, especially because it seemed weird to me, because it's like you got Andy Serkis to play Alfred, and you're going to kill him off in the first movie? That was just kind of strange, especially after so few scenes. But then you have this really heartwarming scene between Alfred and Bruce in the hospital room, where Alfred kind of just explains everything in regards to Bruce's parents and Falcone and Maroni and all the different stuff. And that was actually, Brienne said after the movie, she said that was her favorite scene. She really liked that. I know she always liked the really like heartwarming, like, you know, like the intimate moments of superhero movies. And I really liked it too. I won't say it's my favorite scene. I don't know what my favorite scene would be. But I did really like that scene. Honestly, I think my favorite scene might have been the opening scene whenever, like whenever Batman goes into the crime thing, just because I thought it was cool seeing that detective side of Batman where he's just a million steps ahead of everybody else, where even like Batman's looking at stuff and he just like stares at it for a little bit, and then the the forensic expert's like, oh, I should take a picture of that. I just really like that aspect of it. But yeah, so I thought Alfred, he was decent. I mean, he's no, Michael Caine? Is Michael Caine the guy who played Alfred? Is that his name? The actor who played it in the Dark Knight movies? That guy, it's going to be hard to beat him as Alfred. Like, he is fantastic. I mean, I just recently showed Brienne, like, the Dark Knight movies, and wow, fantastic movies. Like, they're just absolutely fantastic, and Alfred is probably one of the shining elements of those, and so it's kind of hard to beat that. The Riddler, let's talk about him. Paul Dano. Fantastic. Creepy guy. They really went for this serial killer aspect of this, and I think that was a brilliant way to do the Riddler, because that's the scary part. That's where this is still a fanciful and it's still a very comic booky movie, but it is grounded in reality because there are people like the Riddler out there. I mean, you have people in real life like the Zodiac Killer who have still never been discovered. I mean, people can hypothesize on who it is. I've got a book where somebody's like trying to talk about who is the Zodiac Killer. People have their guesses, but they don't know. And you have these people who are methodical, and really they just want attention. They're angry at the world. They're depraved in their spirits, and they're just causing so much destruction. And that's who the Riddler is, right? He sees Batman and his thirst for vengeance, and he takes that in his own direction, and he goes beyond what Batman's willing to do. He's not seeking justice. Well, he is. He thinks he's seeking justice, but he's seeking it in his own perverted way, where he's almost stepping into the role of God, and he's taking life into his own hands, where Batman recognizes you don't cross that line, right? Batman will seek justice. He will imprison people. He will beat them up. He will not kill them. He will not take their life into his own hands. But the Riddler has no problem with that, and he is a creepy guy, and it's scary because there's moments like you actually see him whenever he kills people. Like I said, this is a pretty brutal PG-13 movie, and there's moments where he's unhinged, right? Like, it's one of those things where I think some people might get more unsettled by the fact, like, if he was just like calmly doing it, because it would almost seem like he was detached from reality. But to me, it was almost scarier that you would have these emotional outbursts where he starts like getting really into it and really angry as he's killing this person. And you're like, oh, this person, like, he's still engaged with reality. He's still got this emotional connection. He's not a total psychopath and not a total sociopath. He's just something different. Like, this is a person who's very mad and angry and bitter in his soul and in his spirit, and he's taking it out on the world, and he thinks he's doing the right thing, and that's the scary part, and he's toying with people, and it's just scary. Like, the Riddler, he was a terrifying villain, and he made this movie more like a horror film. There were moments where Brianne and I are sitting there, and we're just like, ooh, like just the opening scene whenever he's about to kill the mayoral candidate. Like, what an intro to this film. You're just like, you're just like squirming in your seat because you're like, this is not going to end well. And so I really liked how Paul Dano played this. And then whenever it's finally like his face is finally revealed, he just looks like this sweet, innocent guy. And I think there's a theological reflection there too, right? We are capable of worse things than we think, right? I mean, there are things that, you see somebody in public and they just look like the nicest individual, but that means nothing for what they do in private, or who they are behind closed doors, or what private things they've just got going on in their lives or in their hearts. That's the scary part. If you were to encounter the Riddler without his mask on a day-to-day basis walking down the street, you would think nothing of him. He looks like this sweet, innocent little guy with his glasses on, but he's a serial killer. And that's scary to me. Like, that's like a very compelling villain, and Paul Dano kicked it out of the park. I mean, one of the best scenes. The scene that kind of confused me, right? The scene where Batman is interacting with him at Arkham. Terrifying scene. Paul Dano just, he starts singing like Ave Maria. He starts singing that song. And that's been something that's been playing in the background for a lot of the films, like especially whenever somebody's about to die, they start playing Ave Maria. And that whole scene, like, the actor just is killing it. So sorry, pardon the pun. But he's absolutely just destroying it. Like, honestly, just fantastic acting. Like, just this unhinged individual explaining his plan, narrating it, and asking Batman for help, and then being confused by the fact that Batman doesn't want to help him. And then you see him freaking out whenever, he's laughing whenever the bombs are going off in Gotham and like the water's flooding in, but then he also starts freaking out. And then you have this cool little Easter egg that we'll mention in a little bit, which kind of seems to set up future stuff. I don't know. And like the entire character was just creepy. And I think that was the goal. And so awesome. If you weren't trying to be creepy, then that's not a good job, because you were very creepy. But no, the actor did a great job being exactly what he needed to be for this film. For a detective Batman movie, I think the Riddler was the perfect foil here, and the way that he was played was absolutely fantastic. He absolutely crushed it, and just a very compelling villain, very scary. He's definitely one of the stronger villains I've seen in a film recently. Once again, I've mentioned, like, the Marvel movies, they don't typically have very strong villains, and lately, I mean, the DC movies, like, DC has a lot of really good villains, but lately they haven't had a lot of great portrayals in film. I mean, like, you have, like, Jesse Eisenberg's Lex Luthor in Batman vs. Superman and Justice League and stuff, and he's not that good. I mean, Lex Luthor is a very compelling villain, but Jesse Eisenberg, I get what they were going for, not the best villain. But Paul Dano as the Riddler, absolutely fantastic. I think he absolutely crushed it. He's scary, he's twisted, don't know what to do with him, but man, I feel like I said, once I see this movie a few more times, I might have to come back and do like a theological analysis where we literally just look at this from like a theological perspective, and just like reflect on the various different themes that are to be found in this film. Let's talk about Detective or Lieutenant Gordon, played by Jeffrey Wright. A very different take on Detective Gordon that we've ever seen. I feel like I've said that for every character, but that's because this is Matt Reeves' vision, and I'm all aboard for that vision. But this Detective Gordon is cool because he's actually like a genuine partner to Batman. Whereas typically, the only really interactions we've had between Detective Gordon and Batman, or typically Commissioner Gordon and Batman, it's usually up by the bat signal, in brief encounters where Batman disappears. And you do have one moment where Batman disappears from Gordon. I think they had to include that. It was whenever they were in the orphanage, and whenever Batman learns that Bruce is the next target, he disappears on Gordon right then. But we actually get Batman and Detective Gordon like actually hanging out quite a bit throughout this film, and I thought that was just really cool. Like, they were actually buddies, and it was just interesting seeing like Gordon almost being like a sidekick to Batman. And you have this interaction where, you know, they're the cops are kind of turning on Batman a little bit, and Gordon helps him escape. And you get to see that Batman's not totally he's still a little bit of a rube. He's new to this, but Detective Gordon trusts him, and he trusts Detective Gordon to an extent, right? I mean, he knows that Gordon's a good cop. It doesn't mean he necessarily trusts him, but he trusts him more than he trusts anybody else. And I just thought, I mean, Jeffrey Wright's just a great actor, right? I mean, it's hard to dislike him in any role. Like, he always kills it. And I just liked him in this part. He really embodied the Commissioner Gordon vibe. And so I'm excited, hopefully. Now there's no longer a commissioner of Gotham City, and so I guess they'll need a new one, and hopefully Gordon will be the next one in line. And then maybe we'll eventually meet his daughter, like Barbara Gordon or something like that. I don't know. Actually, I believe I heard that there is a Batgirl movie or TV show or something coming out soon, so we're probably already going to meet Barbara Gordon. So there you go. But yeah, so I really thought Commissioner Gordon was cool in here. I like that he played a much bigger role than I expected. I thought he would just show up here and there, kind of like he does in the other Batman films, but he actually was a significant role, like bigger than a lot of the other actors. That's why I kind of included him later on in this list. But I thought he did a great job. Don't really have any complaints. Like I said, I don't have really complaints from any of this film. It was a fantastic movie. Like, this was my most anticipated film of the year, and I am leaving entirely satisfied with what I got. And so, yeah, I'm just excited to see it again. Next, we have Catwoman, played by Zoe Kravitz. And once again, cool. We've seen a few different Batwomen. We've seen, Michelle Pfeiffer in Batman Returns, and then we've seen Anne Hathaway in The Dark Knight Rises. And I'm going to be honest, I was never a big fan of either of those portrayals. I know that both of them, they're both decent. They're not bad. I know that a lot of people like the Michelle Pfeiffer one from Batman Returns, but Batman Returns was never my cup of tea. That movie was always... Tim Burton stuff has always been strange to me. I don't know. I've just always felt very weird about it. And maybe I was too young whenever I saw Batman Returns for the first time. But I always just felt very uncomfortable with that film. That's probably the Batman film I'm least likely to rewatch, just because I don't like it that much. Like, something about it is just, it just makes me feel weird and uncomfortable. And so I haven't really gotten back to it a lot. And so I know that a lot of people like the Michelle Pfeiffer Catwoman. I might like her more if I'd rewatch the movie, but I just don't visit it enough, and I generally just have, like, a bad taste in my mouth. Like, it's a good movie, it's just not my type of movie, and so I just generally get, like, a bad taste in my mouth when I think of the movie, and so I don't really care for that one. And Anne Hathaway, she was decent as Catwoman, but really nothing spectacular about her. Really, The Dark Knight Rises, to me, was not I really just don't care for that movie a whole lot either. I really like Batman Begins, and I like The Dark Knight, and I think The Dark Knight Rises suffered because it was following two superb movies, and Dark Knight Rises is just a great movie, right? So it's a great movie, but it's not nearly as good as Batman Begins or Dark Knight. And so, in general, I think, like, Catwoman, she's decent in that one, but I think Zoe Kravitz is for sure my favorite Catwoman so far, just because the chemistry she has with Batman is fantastic. Just the way she's portrayed. She's very likable, but she's also very headstrong, and you can see that there's a lot going inside of her. Like, even just the way that she acts, you can tell that this is an individual with a past, and maybe that's just something I need to mention that I haven't mentioned so far, is that Gotham City feels very lived in this film, and you can tell that, like, it doesn't feel like everybody just... Like their stories just started at one time right here, right? Whenever you engage in this movie, it seems like Penguin's been around for a while. It seems like Zoe Kravitz, Selena Kyle, she's been around for a while. It feels like Lieutenant Gordon's been around for a while, and this is just the first time that these people are interacting with one another, right? And so I think that's one really cool thing. It's not like this is an origin story for everybody. It's really not an origin story for anybody, honestly. It's almost like they've all just been doing their thing. It's just it's a formative moment for all of them, right? So it's not an origin story for any of them. It's a formative moment for all of them. And so I think that's the same thing with Selina Kyle here. I think she's fantastic. You can tell she has a background. She mentions a little bit of it when she talks about her father and her mother and stuff like that with Falcone and her relationship to him. It's kind of weird whenever he's flirting with her because he doesn't realize that she's his daughter. But I really like her interactions with Bruce. With Batman. She doesn't know that he's Bruce Wayne. I think their chemistry was great. I mean, that one particular scene, it's in the trailers where the sun is either rising or setting. I think it's rising. And they're just like standing there talking to each other up by the bat signal. Mwah! Probably the most beautiful scene of the entire film. Not my favorite scene, but the most beautiful one, right, from an aesthetic perspective. And there was one thing I was going to say about... Oh, no, I really liked the moment whenever she was wanting to kill Falcone and Batman holds her back. And says, you've already suffered enough, you've already gone through enough pain, don't make yourself go through more. Something along those lines. I really liked what he said there. And once again, to go with the whole theological reflection thing, I think, honestly, this is one of those movies where you could have like the philosophy of the Batman books like to come out. Because there's a lot of good lines in there where Batman has like very good, just nuggets of wisdom that he says. Which, once again, it portrays that extra level of depth we don't get in a lot of Batman films. And so I really liked how he said that to Selina Kyle, where he was holding her back and he was saying like, hey, you've already gone through enough pain. You don't need the extra pain that comes, the implication that, being that it comes from killing your father, right? Like, don't do this. Like, you think it's going to help you in the moment, but it won't. And so I like that she had a story arc there as well. And then you have the end of the film being like them going in separate directions. She's going off to Bloodhaven, where I think once again, there's been the announcement that there's going to be like a spin-off series possibly with her. And I imagine it'll just be dealing with what she's getting, what she's going and doing over in Bloodhaven. And that's where Nightwing's from, but I don't think Nightwing would be coming around anytime soon, because you still have to have Dick Grayson become Robin and then eventually Nightwing, so he's a long ways away, but that's where Bloodhaven's at. And then, at long last, we can talk about the main character, Batman. Batman is in this film. Surprise, surprise. He is, the film's called The Batman. And this is Robert Pattinson's debut as this character, and he's without a doubt my favorite Batman. Like I said, this is the film that gave me the Batman I've been waiting for. I've always liked the, of all the different aspects of Batman, he's not my favorite character, but the aspect that's always appealed to me the most is the world's greatest detective. And this film gave me that. I loved Robert Pattinson's portrayal of him. Like I said, we don't get a lot of Bruce Wayne in this film. And really, whenever he is playing Bruce Wayne, he's not really playing a different character, because it seems like he hasn't really adopted that billionaire playboy, character yet. He really doesn't have dual identities quite yet. Right now he's almost just using both different identities to achieve the same goal. So if he might have a greater advantage appearing somewhere as Bruce Wayne, he'll show up like that, but he's still very awkward and people are talking to him and he's just getting phased out because he's so lost in the character of Batman. And I think that that's cool, because it's almost like he hasn't adopted the dual identities yet, but he's struggling with the aspect that the Batman identity wants to take him over, right? That is his true identity. And so even whenever he's dressed as Bruce Wayne, he can't escape the noises in his head, right? He can't escape the fact that people are muttering over to his right and to his left, and he's constantly listening, constantly hearing. And this is aspects that you do, this is what's going on with the other Bruce Wayne characters in the other movies, but we just don't ever see that struggle because they're playing it off so well as this billionaire playboy. Whereas Robert Pattinson hasn't really adopted that yet, and he's going to have to learn to, most likely. But right now, he's a rube, right? He's still green at all this. He's still learning the ropes. And so he's struggling to control his anger. You see him really struggling. And I think probably my favorite aspect of this Batman, first off, his suit is amazing. It's a gorgeous suit. I love the bat suit. But I think my favorite part of Robert Pattinson's portrayal of Batman is his eyes. I mean, he portrays so much. I've never seen a Batman film that has been so focused on the eyes of the character. Or I've never seen a Batman film where I've even been drawn to the eyes. But in this film, maybe because he's in the Batman costume 95% of the time, he has to do a lot of acting with his eyes. And he just portrays so much emotion through eyes. And I was like, this is just a great actor. Robert Pattinson, just fantastic. It's crazy that you can watch 95% of a movie where a guy's face is covered, like all of this of his face is covered. You can just see his mouth and then his eyes. And he just does so much with the part where you see in a moment, just the way he's looking at people, you can see what's going on. Like, whenever he sees this little orphan boy at the beginning of the film, like, whenever the mayor dies. I guess he's not an orphan, but he's lost his father. He hasn't lost his mother. I guess, are you still an orphan if you only lose one parent? I don't know. But he sees this boy who's lost his father, and you can almost see tears in his eyes, right? You don't know if he's crying or not, or if it's just like the gleam from like a light or something, but it looks like there's almost a tear in Bruce's eyes, like behind the cowl. And I just thought that Robert Pattinson did a fantastic job. I don't really have much more to say because, like I said, I want to see it again to where I can analyze the character more, but I thought that this was, without a doubt, my favorite version of Batman, and it just has room to improve. I don't know. See, here's where I struggle, because I don't think that they're going to go this detective route for every film, because then it would seem kind of repetitive. And so I don't know what to do with it, because it's like, okay, like, am I going to like the next ones as much? Like, I'm excited to see what they do with this character, and if they go forward, I want to see what different plot points they're going to bring about, but I don't know. This might have just been my flavor of Batman film, because they might emphasize the detective stuff in the future, but I just don't know. I hope so. But I just thought that the way that Pattinson portrayed Batman in this film was absolutely fantastic, and I'll just probably leave it there. Other than that, so that's addressing all the different characters. The other things I wanted to address is that there are some teases for what might come in the future. I mean, we did have the little reference to the Elliot Hush thing. I think that was more just an Easter egg for this movie. I don't think that they're going to go anywhere with that. By the end of this film, Gotham is flooded, and so you might have like a No Man's Land type plot line. If you're familiar with the comics, you might have something like that coming up in the future. I really don't know where they're heading with that. I really didn't like that decision as much. To like flood Gotham. It seems like that's something that should have been preserved for like a later movie. It seemed like really the whole third act of this movie, like if there was a weakness, once you go to the arena and you have the Riddler, like all the other Riddler like people like showing up and stuff, that part was probably the weakest part of the movie for me, just because it seemed more just like a classic like third act of a comic book movie. Probably my least favorite part of the film, but still really good. Like, this to me was the ideal Batman movie. But if there was a weak part, it would be that part. And so I really don't know where they're heading with that. Personally, I kind of would prefer if by the time we got to the second Batman film, if that was just all resolved and Gotham was no longer flooded. But I imagine that's not what they're going to do. I imagine they're going to have it like flooded to where like, you know, maybe there's like an outbreak in Arkham Asylum or something and Batman's having to chase after all these people. I have no idea what they're doing with that, but I guess we'll have to see. No matter what, I'm excited for it. I don't want to be too picky here. Another thing is that the Joker, you know, he's teased in this. I forget the name of the actor who played him. He looked kind of weird. He didn't really look like the Joker, but at the same time, we didn't get a good view of him that much. And so I think they purposely did that so that, you know, if they want to change up the design of him or something like that later on, that's cool. I always like the Joker. I think he's a very interesting figure. I'm always excited to see different portrayals of him. And I was excited he was in this film. He didn't need to be in the film. It seemed like it was more just an Easter egg to set things up for the future. And so I don't know what to do there. And they didn't really give us a whole lot to work with. He didn't really sound a lot like the Joker, and I wasn't sure if that's what they were doing with him until he started laughing, and I was like, okay, he's laughing. But then at the same time, the Riddler started laughing too, and even the Joker like said like a riddle me this thing, and so it was almost like the Riddler and the Joker weren't that different because they both were making riddles and they were both laughing a lot, and I was like, okay, hey, stay in your lane, buddy. But the Joker, it was cool. I just like the Joker in general. So I'm always excited to see different incarnations of him. I might be getting to the point where some people are, where they're kind of tired of seeing the Joker. I don't know. We'll just have to see. I mean, no matter what, I'm not really going to be tired of a character. If you can come up with a great story, and if you're not just shoehorning people in, then I'm going to be there for it. Like, as long as you're putting the art before the marketing, I'm going to be there, right? If you have a compelling story to tell that involves the Joker, I'll enjoy it. If you're doing it just because you think the Joker will make more money, then I'm probably not going to like it as much. And so if they have a compelling story with the Joker, then I will like it. And if they can have the guy play it well, then we'll be good. But yeah, so that was really cool. And then also, I couldn't help but notice that the district attorney got killed, and so they're going to need a new district attorney, and I would say that leaves good grounds for a Mr. Harvey Dent to be appointed as district attorney for Gotham, if they wanted to. If I was just going to speculate where they could go with this, they could appoint him as the district attorney for the second film, and they could really just have him being an amazing person. I mean, if I was going to propose what I would do with this, you've got Gotham being flooded. You have crime like breaking out like crazy. You have a new district attorney, Harvey Dent, coming in, straight-laced guy. He gets everybody, like, he helps Batman fix the crime problem in Gotham. And, you know, they basically, by the end of the second film, you could have it to where they've reined a lot of stuff in. And then you could set it up for like a third film where Harvey Dent turns to Two-Face and becomes like the big bad for that film or something. I don't know. But yeah, I really don't know where else they're going to go with all this. I have no idea. But I'm also excited about that, right? I mean, this movie is a good standalone movie by itself. If they just stopped it here, I think that would be totally fine. It is my ideal Batman film. But I'm also excited by the possibilities of where they could take Robert Pattinson's Batman. And so, yeah, I think I'll just stop there. Really have nothing else to say. And so, thank you for listening to this video. Be sure to let me know whether or not you've seen this movie and what your thoughts were about it. Give me some context on like what your favorite Batman film is, who your favorite Batman actor is, what your favorite Batmobile is. Just let me know all your Batman stuff, what your favorite scene from this movie was, what you liked, what you didn't like. Let's start a conversation in the comments down below. Be sure to like this video, subscribe to the channel, turn on the notification bell, do all that fun stuff. And yeah, my name is David Tate. This is Now Let's Be Honest, or in the case of today's video, this is Now Let's Be Honest about movies, and I will see y'all next time. Bye.